Another bend and I have the honour of one of England's straightest and fastest roads. The burble of my exhaust unwound like a long cord behind me. Soon my speed snapped it, and I heard only the cry of the wind, which my battering head split and fended aside. The cry rose with my speed to a shriek, while the air's coldness streamed like 2 jets of iced water into my dissolving eyes. I screwed them to slits and focused my sight 200 yards ahead of me on the empty mosaic of the tar's gravelled undulations. Like arrows, the tiny flies pricked my cheeks, and sometimes a heavier body, some housefly or beetle, would crash into my face or lips like a spent bullet. A glance at the speedometer, 78, Boa is warming up. I pull the throttle right open on the top of the slope, and we swoop flying across the dip, and up down the switchbacks beyond, the weighty machine launching itself like a projectile with a whir of wheels into the air at the takeoff of each rise to land lurchingly with such a snap of the driving chain as jerks my spine like a rictus. Once we so fled across the evening light with the yellow sun on my left when a huge shadowy roared just overhead. A Bristol fighter from whitewashed villas, our neighbouring aerodrome, was banking sharply round. I checked speed and instance to wave, and the slipstream of my impetus snapped my arm and elbow astern like a raised flail. The pilot pointed down the road towards Lincoln. I sat hard in the saddle, folded my ears back, and went away after him like a dog after a hare. Quickly we drew abreast as the impulse of his dive to my level exhausted itself. The next mile of road was rough. I braced my feet into the rest, thrust my arms and clenched my knees onto the tank till its rubber grips goggled my thighs. Over the first pothole, Boa screamed in surprise, its mudguard bottoming with a yawp on the tyres. Through the plunges of the next 10 seconds, I clung on, wedging my gloved hand in the throttle lever so that no bump could close it and spoil our speed. Then the bicycle wrenched sideways into 3 long ruts. It swayed dizzily, wagging its tail for 30 awful yards. Out came the clutch, the engine raced freely. Boa checked and straightened his head with a shake as a Brough should. The bad ground was past, and on the new road our flight became bird-like. My head was blown out with air so that my ears had failed, and we seemed to whir soundlessly between the sun-gilt stubble fields. I dared on a rise to slow imperceptibly and glance sideways into the sky. There the biff was, 200 yards or more back. Play with the fellow. Why not? I slowed to 90, signalled with my hand for him to overtake. Slowed 10 more, sat up. Over he rattled. His passenger, a helmeted and goggled grin, hung out of the cockpit to pass me the up ya, Raff Randy greeting. They were hoping I was a flash in the pan, giving them my best. Open went my throttle again. Boa crept level, 50 feet below, held them, sailed ahead into the clean and lonely country. An approaching car pulled nearly into its ditch at the sight of our race. The biff was zooming along the trees and telegraph poles with my scurrying spot only 80 yards ahead. I gained though, gained steadily, was perhaps 5 miles an hour the faster. Down went my left hand to give the engine 2 extra dollops of oil for fear of something was running hot, but an overhead Jap twin, super twin like this one, would carry on to the moon and back, unfaltering. I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you why the Brough Superior and T.E. Lawrence, or Lawrence of Arabia, were very important figures in history and why they had a direct impact on you as a rider today. I'd like to read an article first published online by Dealey Exhibitions in California entitled When Lawrence Met Brough, How the Death of a Legend Paved the Way for Motorcycle Safety. Described by many as the Rolls-Royce of motorcycles, in its heyday, Brough Superior was the pinnacle of luxury motorcycles, appealing to nobility, aristocracy, and even royalty. Starting around 1914, George Brough began developing his brand as a way to branch out from under the shadows of his father's flat track success. George wanted a motorcycle unlike any he had encountered before. He wanted to create a motorcycle that fit all of his personal ideals while still doing war work. Brough took his share of his inheritance and spent his days developing the now iconic brand in a small shop in Nottingham. By 1920, the first advertisement was released. George was an innovator in motorcycles, developing the first prop stand, twin headlamps, crash bars, and interconnected silencers. Although there were 4 primary models during Brough's popularity, the SS100, S880, SS680, OHV, and the model 11.50, each Brough motorcycle was customizable, made to each rider's specification and needs. This is partially where the exclusivity of the brand comes from, but also by manufacturing standards, only around 3,000 were ever made. Unfortunately, production came to an end during the close of the Second World War, with the recent revival of the brand being in 2017. However, our story doesn't end there. Part of Brough Superior's renown and success came from the prestigious people who owned a Brough. One of the most famous owners and riders of Brough Superior was T.E. Lawrence, otherwise known as Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence was a British soldier, scholar and writer. During the First World War, his sympathies with the Arab people brought him to mobilise an Arab revolt in which he led a small force against Turkey that attacked communication and supply routes. Sensationalisation of this time in the East led to his fame upon his return to England. Lawrence was a proud owner of a Brough Superior, having owned 8 in his lifetime, describing one of his bikes as a skittish motorcycle with a touch of blood in it. He even gave his favourite, a 998cc, the nickname Boa, which was a shortened version of the Aramaic word meaning son of thunder. It was on this 998cc that Lawrence met his tragic end. The story goes that while riding near his Dorset home in England, a small dip in the road blocked his view of a couple of boys and bicycles ahead. Manoeuvring to avoid the boys, Lawrence went flying off his bike and hit his uncovered head. Sadly, it was common to ride without a helmet at that time. On May the 19th, 1935, 6 days after the accident, T.E. Lawrence passed away at the age of 46. His death was hailed as a tragic waste by the New York Times. One of the attending medics at the hospital was Hugh Cairns, one of Britain's first neurosurgeons. Cairns' post-mortem found that Lawrence had passed away from severe lacerations and damage to the brain. Had he survived, the brain damage would have left him blind and unable to speak. It is speculated through examination of his diaries that it was Lawrence's death that first led Cairns to begin to formulate his thoughts on crash helmets. It wasn't until 6 years after Lawrence's death that Cairns, now a consulting neurosurgeon to the army, published an article in the British Medical Journal on the importance of the crash helmet. His findings showed that in the 21 months leading up to the Second World War, of all the motorcycle deaths in England, 2/3 of those deaths were from head injuries. His conclusion was that crash helmets should be examined more closely, not as an ultimate solution, but as a way to mitigate the amount of motorcycle deaths. In November 1941, the same year as the article was published, the British Army, having been convinced by Cairns, ordered all dispatch riders to wear helmets. It was the coming together of a legendary motorcycle and a legendary man that led to Cairns' research and eventually to the widespread use for both military personnel and civilians of the crash helmet. And so next time when you're out for a ride, wearing your expensive and very protective crash helmet, you have much to thank T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, and his Brough Superior, Boa, for that protection on your head. Ride often, ride safely, ride on.